think about there will be a day after COVID-19 and business needs to continue on. So I'm here today because as governor, along with Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, we have the honor of appointing justices to the Minnesota Supreme Court. The Minnesota Supreme Court justices decide some of the most pressing, significant questions of our time, and they set the standards for justice across the state. Each appointment to this court is momentous, and each of these esteemed justices will impact the lives of Minnesotans now and generations into the future. Before I announce the appointment for today, I'd like to take time to recognize the legacy of outgoing Justice David Lillehog. Justice Lillehog's legal career spanned more than 40 years, included clerkships with the Honorable Harry McLaughlin, working with the Honorable Walter Mondale, and years of service both as a United States Attorney for the District of Minnesota and in private practice. On our state's great Supreme Court, Justice Lillehog brought his deep constitutional knowledge and strong moral compass to every constitutional issue facing Minnesotans. Justice Lillehog's retirement leaves a prominent absence on the bench. His many contributions to the judiciary and the legal community will be deeply missed. My best wishes to Justice Lillehog and his family as he begins a well-earned retirement. I don't take the responsibility of filling this vacancy lightly. One Minnesota means that many voices at the decision table. As I've done before, when making my decisions, I've relied on a process grounded in robust stakeholder outreach and consultation with a panel of leaders in the legal community. My administration consulted with stakeholders across the state to seek applicants with the brightest legal minds and the most dedicated public servants across Minnesota's many diverse communities. A merit selection panel selected 4 outstanding finalists, and I want to thank each and every one of them for their exceptional service for the state and for being in that position. I myself made dozens of calls across many constituencies, to legal minds, to community leaders, to just so many, and the feedback was amazing. So today, I'm proud to announce my appointment of Gordon Moore as the next Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court. Minnesota has a long and proud history of appointing excellent trial court judges from Greater Minnesota to the Supreme Court. Judge Moore joins those ranks today. Judge Moore's record of public service is impressive, and his commitment to our state is unparalleled. Having been raised in Rochester, college educated in Northfield, married in Mankato, and employed in Worthington for the past 25 years, he is truly a product of one Minnesota. And throughout his career, he's either practiced law or presided over courts in 50 of our state's 87 counties. Judge Moore currently serves as a district court in Nobles County, one of the most ethnically diverse counties in all of Minnesota. Prior to that, he served as the Nobles County Attorney, an Assistant City Attorney for Worthington, and a Special Assistant and Assistant Attorney General under Attorney General Hubert Skip Humphrey III. In addition to this important legal work, Judge Moore served as a community leader for so many years. His tireless work on the local school board, fighting for much-needed funds to ensure a strong public education for students in Worthington, demonstrated his commitments to the values of one Minnesota. Feedback from Judge Moore's peers was resoundingly clear. Gordon Moore is a leader in his community and respected by all. In reviewing his letters of recommendation, I heard from legal assistants, retired judges, public defenders, peer judges, court interpreters, nonprofit professionals, and local law enforcement. These are some of the words I picked out as I read through these. Judge Moore has a keen legal mind, is diligent, always well prepared. He is kind, curious, committed, approachable, caring, and always calm. In addition to all of this, during my conversation with folks and with Judge Moore himself, it was resoundingly clear that he's a man with a strong moral compass, a deep sense of compassion, and a thoughtful and diligent mind. He's a dad, he's a husband, a youth soccer and hockey coach. Without a doubt, Judge Moore is a person of the highest caliber. And to reporters in the room, I found this really interesting. I want to mention that Judge Moore's writing sample, we do a writing sample, and it's judged blindly by everybody who applies. And I read through those. And it gives you an idea of, and on the Supreme Court, writing skill is one thing, but it gives you a bit of a window into what they chose. They can choose anything in a case that's out there. Judge Moore addressed the importance of freedom of the press in his essay. Judge Moore quoted U.S. Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black in the landmark New York Times versus United States case over the printing of the Pentagon Papers. Justice Black wrote, and I quote, "The press was to serve the governed, not the governors." Judge Moore wrote that the freedom of the press granted by our nation's and our state's constitutions and upheld by the courts, quoted, makes government work more effectively, decreases the risk of corruption, holds public officials accountable, and corrects injustices. Judge Moore's perspective on this topic is one which I wholeheartedly endorse and agree with. I know that Judge Moore will continue to serve the state with distinction in his new role, Associate Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court. I know the future of our state is in good hands. And with that, I am honored to introduce to you incoming Minnesota Supreme Court Justice, Judge Gordon Moore. Congratulations.
Well, good morning, Minnesotans. Thank you, Governor Walz, first of all, for giving me this opportunity, which lawyers in this state aspire to serve all the state of Minnesota on the Minnesota Supreme Court. I am deeply honored to be entrusted with your confidence, and your words are very kind. I also want to thank the Judicial Selection Chairperson, Lola Velasquez Aguilu, and the governor's panel that was involved in the process that considered the applications for these positions. To be selected as a finalist for this position with the three other incredibly talented and esteemed lawyers and jurists was in and of itself a great honor. To be here today to be appointed from that group is truly a high honor and a distinct privilege. I pledge to you, members of the judiciary in the state of Minnesota, to work hard with the goal of securing impartial justice for all Minnesotans. That has been my work in the judicial area and in my legal area for the last 32 years, and that will continue to be my touchstone. Now, nobody gets to this point without the support of many, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of those people here today. The list is actually longer than time permits, but in particular, I need to first thank my colleagues on the 5th Judicial District bench in Southwest Minnesota. We serve 15 counties in the very southwest part of the state, oftentimes in one-judge counties, and these are people that are doing justice every day in rural Minnesota. I want to thank my chief judges over the past 8 years. These three jurists, Doug Richards, the late Doug Richards, Brad Walker, and Michelle Dietrich, have provided me with mentorship, support, and frankly a nudge now and then when I needed it. The judicial colleagues throughout the state of Minnesota and the Court of Appeals, so many of you have reached out to me and have said kind things and supportive things, and I'm so grateful for your support and encouragement. The Minnesota District Judges Association, its president, Judge Hoffman, former President Judge Warner. This is an organization that supports us, and I thank the membership of that organization as well. A special note to judges in greater Minnesota. We call ourselves the One Judge County Club. We serve persons oftentimes in very rural and remote areas, and we have a unique relationship with the community, and my thoughts are with all of you today. Particular thanks must go out to my Nobles County staff, my court administrator, my court reporter, and my law clerk. These are the people that on a daily basis make sure that our judicial system works. Without them, we don't function, and judges don't get to do their job. I'd also like to thank all the attorneys in the Worthington area that over the course of time I've had cases against or in front of me, the people that wrote kind letters of recommendations, the court interpreters, nonprofit chairs. These are the people that I've interacted with, and your support is very grateful. I do want to also mention briefly the staff, starting with the Attorney General's office and the Von Holtem Law office in Worthington, and then the Nobles County Attorney's office. These were my jobs before getting to the bench, and my colleagues and friendships from those offices continue to support me to today. Finally, and most importantly, I want to thank my family. Two of my family members I have the blessing to have here with me today, my wife Jane and my oldest son Gordy. My younger two are at home doing online college finals today, and unfortunately my parents are with us today only in spirit, but I know that they are looking down on me regarding today's events. I do want to thank Justice Lillehog for his service to the state and to this court. To say that I have some big shoes to fill would be probably the largest understatement of the day. Justice Lillehog's thoughtful insight and analysis in writing and oral argument is a model for any justice that is looking to be on the Supreme Court. I certainly have some work to do regarding hypotheticals because there's nobody better at it. Justice Lillehog, I know, was raised in Sioux Falls and knows something about the prairies of southwest Minnesota. He also knows something about arts and culture, and I hope to emulate his service to the court in some small measure. My career in the legal system, as Governor Walz mentioned, started with the Attorney General's office. There I was blessed with the opportunity to see this great state from north to south and east to west. Traveling around the state, it was always an honor to come into courtrooms and say, I represent the state of Minnesota as an Assistant Attorney General, and I've never forgotten that. We decided to return to southern Minnesota to raise a family in Worthington through some circumstances of family. And so that's where we've been for the last 25 years. And that community has supported and blessed me in ways that I can never repay. It is a remarkable, diverse, and interesting community that has, frankly, had some difficulties recently. I don't think there's any question about that. But the resiliency of the farmers and the business owners and the workers in Worthington will rise up and will solve this and get beyond this. I have no doubt about that. The Worthington story is really a microcosm of the bigger story that our state is undergoing. The transformation of Worthington over the past 25 years has just been extraordinary. We are one of the most diverse communities in the state, and we pride ourselves on that. We pride ourselves on leadership on issues such as racial justice, such as community policing, and we've done a good job in that. My experience there has given me a knowledge and deep respect for all types of citizens, both the fourth generation farmer that's coming into my courtroom, as well as the first generation immigrant who's perhaps been here for just a few months seeking relief. It is my hope to bring the perspective that I've gained over that course of time from outstate Minnesota to the court as we address the challenging cases which undoubtedly will be before us. In doing so, I would like to briefly echo the words of Supreme Court Justice David Souter regarding the lessons that he learned as a judge in state court. And he said this in his confirmation hearings before the Senate: in whatever court we are in, trial or appellate, at the end of our task, some human being is going to be affected, and lives are going to be changed by the decisions that we make. And so we had better use every part of our minds and our hearts and our beings to get those rulings right. And so, Governor, I give you my vow and my pledge, and to the people of the state of Minnesota, that I will do so to the best of my judgment and ability. And I look forward to working with my new colleagues in the Minnesota Supreme Court, while never forgetting those that I have worked with in the past who have supported me and gotten me to this point. Thank you to the people of this great state, and thank you for Governor Walz for this amazing opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Judge Moore. I'll keep you close. I think they want to talk to you more than me. So, well, thank you all, Minnesotans. This is it's a historic moment anytime a Supreme Court justice is chosen to ascend to the bench. It matters. I want to give a thank you to Chief Justice Lori Gilday and all of the Associate Justices on the Supreme Court. You spent a lot of time with me. We spent a lot of time on the history of the court. And I think for maybe Minnesotans to understand, the Minnesota Supreme Court does amazing things in that over 70% of their cases, 70% of the decisions they come down with are unanimous. They work to find consensus. They work to find the right answer. They're not there to win an ideological battle alone. They're there to serve the people of Minnesota. And I think those attributes are what shine so brightly with Judge Moore and what he will bring to the court, because it's very special. And I think many of you out there, you might not hear a lot about the Minnesota Supreme Court, and a lot of that has to do with is because they do the work and they do it well. And so it's just a great day for the state of Minnesota. I think in the midst of COVID-19, it's a bit of a breather to come and recognize that that these things still continue on, and we'll get there. And so congratulations, Gordon, to the family and everyone else. Tom, I'm going to step aside and let the judge take.
Judge Moore, congratulations.
Thank you.
First of all, my question to you is, I'm sure you've watched with interest what the Wisconsin Supreme Court has recently ruled when it came to their governor's stay-at-home order. I know you don't like to talk about how you might rule on cases, but are you guessing there's going to be a whole slew of COVID-19 cases possibly coming to the Supreme Court, whether it's challenging government orders or liability issues? And how difficult might that be to navigate, given there is very little recent precedent for what is going on?
Well, first of all, my hope would be that we wouldn't have that type of flood of litigation. My hope is that consensus can be reached and that cooler heads will prevail, and that frankly we won't have some of the scenario that's occurred in Wisconsin, which has been terribly divisive. It's pitted communities against the state, people against each other, and it would be irresponsible for me to give any prediction as to how those cases would come or how I would rule. But I just want to say that I think our court has been, and I say that from top to bottom, has been a model for this nation of impartiality and collegiality, and we have really avoided some of the problems that have beset some other states with conflicts among justices and highly politicized campaigns. We have, as the governor indicated, sought consensus where that is possible, because I think the court speaks to the state in the most appropriate way when it is a unanimous decision, when there is a one-voice decision. And that's what I would seek if such litigation came forward. Given some of the comments that I've seen recently, I'm hopeful that some of the concerns that have been expressed are being addressed in such a way that there won't be that type of flood of litigation, although I'm certainly aware of resolutions that have been passed by cities near to where I work expressing frustration. And there's no doubt that there are genuine concerns from the small business community in particular about the effect of prolonged shutdown on operation, and how we balance that with public safety and health is a challenging concept. I'm hopeful, maybe a little naive, but maybe it's Minnesotan in me to think that, you know, we're maybe a little better than some of that, and I'd like to believe that, and I hope very much that, you know, there'll be a consensus as to what's in the best interest of the entire state as opposed to a particular community.
Thank you.
Judge, a question from Kevin Featherly. You're entering the job at a critical time when the courts are trying to figure out how to restart criminal trials. What would be your approach if you are asked to help decide how quickly to kick the courts back into gear?
Well, that's an excellent question. We are now in what we call the transitional phase with the lifting of some of the stay-at-home restrictions. We haven't, you know, flipped the switch or turned the dial back to business as usual, but the reading that I have done suggests that we need to be very cautious about resuming normal operations. We have done things in the last 6 weeks as courts in this state that frankly would have been unheard of 2 months ago. I know judges that have not been in a courthouse for weeks and are conducting court hearings and doing it well from their homes or home offices. My concern is the reading that I've done about what happens in contained or closed systems with coronavirus and the potential effect that would have on people, even maintaining social distance, is a serious concern to me. Because I don't believe we can have fair trials if the jurors don't feel safe. I don't think defendants are going to get justice. I don't think anybody's going to get justice. I think, unfortunately, we're going to have a lot of jurors that don't want to be there. And that can't happen. We need focus on the facts and the law and not on, you know, who might be ill in the courtroom. And so we're going to have to go very slowly and methodically. It's got to be based upon science, guidance from the Department of Health. And, you know, hopefully some work from some other states may give us some guidance too on how we do this in a socially distant way. The elbow-to-elbow model in the jury box that has been part of our judicial system forever is something we're going to have to carefully reevaluate. And how we could do that is going to be a discussion for probably endless committee meetings. We have technology, we have ITV, we have lots of different resources. How can we put those to work to make sure that the focus is on the case and not on the disease? And that's what I'm hopeful we can find a solution to. But I don't think we're going to be having a lot of jury trials in the near future in most courthouses. We're going to be doing some pilot counties is what I understand first.
Judge over here.
Yes. I want to take you back to open government. Freedom of the press is great in theory. It comes into play in state and local government and how open government laws are enforced. And I'm not a Minnesotan, and I found the laws here to be weak, and I found the case law to be worse. So given that perhaps aggressive approach, I'd love to hear your point of view about things like open meetings law, Data Practices Act, open courts, cameras in the courtroom, as far as a broad governmental transparency theory.
Well, those are meaty topics. Any one of those could probably justify a number of minutes in response. Let's take the cameras in the courtroom question first, because that's really germane. Obviously, the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals have been leaders on ensuring that citizens of the state are able to see their justice system at work. The trial courts have been slow to adapt to that. There are a lot of competing interests at the district court level that we have to be mindful of. Obviously, I know the county attorneys and others are very concerned about the potential chilling effect on witnesses and victims, particularly domestic violence and sexual assault victims, of having cameras in the courtroom. But under the leadership of our Chief Justice, we have been moving slowly and deliberately in that direction. And now there is authority for cameras in the courtroom for certain types of proceedings, primarily civil cases and other types of criminal cases at sentencing. Will we ever get to what other states have? I don't know. I think we are going to be mindful of all the considerations here, and there were a lot of comments, I know, when the Supreme Court did its analysis of this. The Minnesota Government Data Practices Act is a unique piece of legislation, and you mentioned it can be somewhat of a labyrinth of different statutes and different rules and different constructs. We have the Department of Administration process to review data practices complaints. We have the district court process. Whether that is ultimately effective may be somewhat in the eye of the beholder. I will grant you that. I have heard some of the same comments that you are echoing about the access to public records. The presumption is public unless stated otherwise. But how those laws are interpreted on a case-by-case basis can become somewhat challenging. I believe in transparency in government. I wrote the essay that Governor Walz mentioned because I believe now more than ever in the importance of the press as being an honest broker for government. We cannot have a system where the press is demonized and turned into the so-called enemy of the people, or some other type of organization that is thwarting, basic justice. We have to work cooperatively with the press, while also being mindful of the rights that persons have in that data that may be contained in government, and that's a sensitive process. I would do my very best to try to reconcile those concepts. Obviously, how they would come out on an individual case is probably going to be very fact dependent.
Judge, as you just mentioned, the COVID-19 issue is going to be with us for a while, perhaps for another year or two, and you said that Minnesota's right to a speedy trial is going to be impacted on the front end, and on the other end, there are some nonviolent people in prison who are being released. How are you going to balance those? How should the court system balance those two things?
Well, we have to prioritize the rights of criminal defendants in custody, and this is going to be the biggest challenge for the court system, because we have the ability to make certain findings given extraordinary circumstances to continue speedy trials, but criminal defendants that are in custody have a right under the Constitution and statute to a speedy resolution of their case. How we do that in the age of coronavirus is the challenge. As I indicated to the other question here, I'm very concerned that having a trial that doesn't involve a real justice is not going to serve anybody's interests. On the other hand, we have people that can't make bail or are for reasons being held in custody prior to their trial. We are going to have to figure this out. There will be a series of pilot counties that are going to be taking the first steps towards resuming jury trials, and then I believe there's going to be a phased approach for the other counties in this state. Nobles, I think, is in the second wave of that. And by trial and maybe by some error, we are going to have to figure out a way that we can reconcile all the interests here in an appropriate way. I am very concerned about the potential backlog of cases generally in the court system right now because of COVID. We have tried to move things along by using Zoom technology, other virtual meeting room technology. Judges are keeping cases moving. I think it's really important for the citizens to know that. The courthouse is not closed. Even if the counter may not be open, judges and staff are working every single day from home, from their office, doing the work that needs to be done. The trial piece is the biggest challenge. The good news is we've got some very smart people that are involved in thinking about how that's going to work. And I'm sure we're going to be hearing more about that in the coming days as some of the changes occur with the stay-at-home order that have been issued. And bringing people back into the courtroom in the courthouse has to be a deliberative and a process that the people trust and can understand. I don't want people being frightened about coming into a courtroom, to be blunt. That's my concern right now.
A question for the governor.
Yes.
A compilation, I suppose, of some of our poolers' questions. Did the COVID-19 pandemic factor into this decision? And what would you say to some who might criticize you for passing up an opportunity to choose someone other than a white man to replace a white man?
Yeah, no, I think this is always diversity, and I think at this point in time, my judicial selections at this point have probably been the most diverse. This was started as a deliberate attempt to, I think, fix some of those inequities under Governor Dayton. We've continued that. I do think that always factors into it. I have said also that there are geographic factors to think into this, and I think we have Justice Anderson is from out in Hutchinson area, and then we had Justice Simonette years ago. The one thing that struck me the most is how few had been picked in recent years, and so I recognize that. I think that the opportunity to go out and search, we searched, we had a fine group of candidates in that, and we had female candidate, we had Hispanic candidate, and we had two male candidates, white male candidates. So I think it's always something we take into consideration. It's part of the totality of the applicant and what we're looking for. And your first question was?
Did the pandemic affect this decision?
Yeah, no, operationally a bit. I don't think it was, I think incoming Justice Moore brought up a good point here. You don't want the technology to overshadow what you're trying to do, and that's in the courts. And we did have to do these interviews over technology-wise. That's about the only way. And just to be clear for Minnesotans to think about this, this is probably one of the most momentous decisions that a governor makes because of the implications it has. When I received Justice Lillehog's intent to resign a year ago, planning starts then in terms of how will the selection committee be put together, because this really matters. The people who apply have to know that the system that's out there searching for them is fair. They want to be there. They start thinking through all those things. So COVID-19 didn't play into it other than just some of the logistical sides of it, because this is a process that quite honestly was in its beginning stages a year ago and really ramped up. And I think some of the attorneys in here and on the team would say the last 90 days have been very hectic. This is a very long process, and it's meant to be the amount of scrutiny and due diligence that goes into these candidates is pretty immense. So in that regard, it did not. But I think the question on diversity on the court is one that's always there, and it plays into our decision, but not in its totality. And this was the right pick, and I feel confident that Judge Moore brings that unique perspective. And in this case, it is a perspective of living in greater Minnesota for the last quarter century.
I'm ready to transition if you are.
Are there any more questions with
I think we're good.
Judge Moore? We want to transition.
Just a really quick one. How old are you?
I won't ask you to guess. I am 57. I was raised in Rochester, as the governor indicated, graduated from good old Mayo High School in Rochester and went to college in Northfield, and met my wife and got married in Mankato, and have been in Worthington since 1995. Law degree from the University of Iowa, 1988.
That did factor into the decision, but overall,
Yeah.
So,
I realize, yeah, that might be a strike. No, the good citizens of Iowa gave me a legal education for 3 years, but I've been in Minnesota with the exception of those 3 years all my life. Thanks.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you all. And just before we get started, I think it is a good indication. Thank you for the questions, and they're insightful, they're thoughtful, and it's interesting on the legal question how everything does get filtered through a backdrop of COVID-19 right now. And it's I think that idea, even the questions of transparency in government and those types of things, that is a factor in this, that you want to make sure that at a time when we're restricting physical access, we are not restricting or putting behind closed doors things that should be done openly. So I appreciate those questions. Tom, or, yeah, go ahead. No, Peter, go ahead.
I'm going to start with COVID and then maybe get to the legislature
Sure.
later in this press conference. You made the decision this week to start opening up some more businesses, and yesterday before the Economic Club of Minnesota, Neil Kashkari kind of questioned Minnesota's actions and other states' actions, and he said, and yet our cases of COVID continue to climb, our cases of hospitalizations continue to climb, our cases of going to the ICU continue to climb, and our cases of deaths continue to climb. So it's one thing to have standards, it's another thing to actually follow the standards. It doesn't strike me that most of the country is even following the standards.
Yeah, well, I would dispute that they're not climbing, they're staying steady as a percentage of the whole. And I saw today a chart that showed percentage of, and this is really about how much capacity to have when someone needs it. That's what this was all about. And so, for example, they showed the 27 or 28 states that are coming down of their hospital capacity. And then they showed the 9 states that were going up. Minnesota was one of those. So it seems counterintuitive that why would you do that? But our capacity, yes, is going up, but it's going up from 3.2 to 3.7. New York was going down from 40.1 to 27.1. So if you glanced at that and said, well, the indicator said you've gone down for 5 days, they've gone down from a massive overuse. We have gone up from at the place we started was one of the lowest. So I understand that. I think trends matter, but to look at it, we have actually, while we had 6,000 tests today, we had 808 positives, the highest number. Yet we had lower number of people in the hospital and 3 lower in the ICU. So from a pure perspective of saying that, oh, your numbers went up, your hospital rates were still, relatively stable, that's the one we're looking at to make sure that we don't overwhelm the system. We always knew this was about keeping the temperature at a low simmer and not letting it boil up. And again, the issue does come, and it is not an illegitimate argument to make, what is on the other side of the ledger that causes both financial, psychological, and health damage that you're putting off. And I think all those factored in. So I would disagree with the fact that, again, certainly, and he's right, though, about this. The CDC guidance no one is listening to in terms of, because I think some of it comes from because this information is put out and then we're told not to listen to it or it changes. But one of the things is the reason that in this case, there is a call for federal plan, there is a need for federal guidance, but the recognition that each of us are at different parts of the pandemic warrants a different approach to it. And so I still believe, and again, we put in, I think, a little bit different approach that when our gates are hit, it'll be when those go up. So if those numbers continue to grow, and they very well could, as I said, this could go bad very quickly if we don't do the social distancing, don't get it right. There are red lines in there that'll be stopped before we overwhelm. But I think it's really important if you said today, well, it makes sense. It makes sense that Pennsylvania's opening up. Their numbers are coming back down. Yeah, from 19 to 16. We've gone from 3.2 to 3.7. So our space and our capacity is still greater. I keep saying this. We have more beds available than the state of Illinois. They've got 13 million people. We've got 5.7. So the difference on that is you have to take that into consideration.
Can I follow up on that real
Sure.
quick? Sorry, Tom. Next steps, though. Really in 2 weeks, you're going to open bars, food halls, food courts,
We'll
places
see.
where people gather. We don't make the best judgments after a couple of beers.
No, and proof positive is that I would respect this when the courts rule. I respect where they rule, but the chaos that got created in Wisconsin, this does come back to how people respond. There's absolutely no doubt when you gather like that, people are going to get it. Again, I will validate the point that says we need to get the economy going because it is having detrimental effects that are going to impact many other things, and we have to do it smartly because this is real. Those that just say this isn't real, we should just open up, causes a problem. So what I've said is we've got a week till next Wednesday to work with health groups, work with the hospitals, work with the businesses, and see if this is possible. Now, I've said I've tried to give them a spot in time because it takes some planning. At any point in time, if we don't feel we can do this or the data doesn't show right, we won't do it. But I think trying to figure out, and again, I come back to this, in the lack of a federal strategy, we're going to have to figure this out to our unique position. But do I anticipate you'll have crowded bars elbow to elbow? No. But do I think there might be the capacity to do it in a way that makes sense? We're going to see again. If people just choose not to wear masks. I was on a call this morning, and this is a challenge too, with a group of security guards. And they're nervous because they see this around the country, that they're being paid to stand at the door of a private business or somewhere and say, you know, you need to wear a mask in here. We've had incidents of people being shot or pushed or told no. If we get into a situation like that, this isn't going to work. But if we have people adhere to those things, I think that yes, we can. But Peter's question is well taken, and I don't think we should be naive to believe that we're out of this thing. We knew that we were going to have to maintain this. I think Tom is right. A year or so in a new normal. It's going to be dependent on some of that collaboration and cooperation to work together, but with a clear understanding, those numbers matter. If the hospitals say, and they've got triggers in there, if this goes on any longer, we're going to get overwhelmed. That's when you have to start turning down the heat and get more of a simmer.
Governor, as a follow-up to what Peter just asked, I have seen online some bars and restaurants already advertising, hey, we get to open on June 1st. I've heard people at hair salons planning on a June 1st, health clubs planning on a June 1st. Can you just very distinctly clarify for them, June 1st is not necessarily a magical date?
No, it's not a magical date. It's our goal. I think we need to give them more certainty. What we said is that there would be a set of things that we believe we can come up with, best practices from around the country, new data, and be able by next Wednesday to start putting that in place. And folks that think they can meet that or do that, and maybe some of these folks who are saying that have been working on this the whole time and they're ready to go. So I think there is certainly the possibility that can happen, but it's not a guarantee. We're not going to start 45 minutes after the court ruled in Wisconsin that the doors are open and they can do whatever they want to do. That isn't going to happen, nor do I believe in any way that Hospitality Minnesota or any of these folks here really want to do that, because it is only going to be a matter of time before that reputation gets around where somebody gets it.
That goes for hair salons
Yes.
and health clubs as well? Just because
Yes, they're part of the mix to see if it can be done. And what I've said is that we want to give them the opportunity to, let's all of us together prove if we can do this. New data is coming up. I received calls last night from Vice President Pence, Dr. Birx, and Dr. Birx was talking with Commissioner Malcolm this morning. The White House is very interested because of this very thing, that while our numbers stayed relatively low and they're going up, and we're trying to do some of these things of opening, they're kind of interested to see, is this the model for sustainability in the long run? And I think if we don't give the opportunity to see if this can be done, that would be a mistake.
And it sounds to me like when it comes to bars and restaurants, you're considering requiring both patrons and employees to have to wear masks. And if that's true, are you any closer to mandating masks in Minnesota?
No, and I do appreciate this question, and I think these days are a good opportunity for the public to hear how we're thinking about this and these good questions. I was on last night with the other 7 Midwestern governors, Mike DeWine, Holcomb in Indiana, Gretchen Whitmer, Tony Evers, and J.B. Pritzker, and then Brashear from Kentucky. And each state's a little different, but we're working together. We share some of these best practices with that. And DeWine was talking about when he believes that they need to do it, he's trying everything, but he thinks, and I think he's right, the social psychological aspect of masks kind of becoming a flashpoint, almost like a lapel pin or something. We've got to get rid of that. And his take was when they mandated it, it didn't work. When they talked about this being about helping your neighbor and making it easier to open more things, they got a higher compliance rate. And I am, contrary to the narrative of the people in my front yard yesterday, I think you should limit as many of those things it tries to mandate, both from a constitutional perspective and from a perspective of it's impossible to enforce that. We're not have the state patrol going on mass patrol, but I do think now, and this is what I'm hoping, I'm seeing it, I think, a little bit more, the onus is on Minnesotans to get this. So I don't think, Tom, I wouldn't say an absolute on this, but I am very hesitant on a mandate on it, because I think the purpose is just to get people to do it to protect others, rather than trying to force that.
Governor, we've had a few questions from newsrooms on our eastern border with Wisconsin. Obviously, bars there open this week. What are your thoughts about that, and are you worried about Minnesotans jumping the border to go get a beer?
Well, not as worried as I'd be as Wisconsin's doing it, but I wouldn't. I don't know. I worry for the public health and the people's individual health, but I also think this really does come down to, and this has been a fair argument that's been made. A lot of this is dependent on trusting the public, and we trust the public on a lot of things, but we still have speed limits. We still have different laws to keep guideposts in there. On this one, people are going to make that choice on their own, but the thing I keep trying to convey is it's not about you not being afraid, and it's not even necessarily you about your personal liberties. It's about that action will impact others, and I don't think it's that different than smoking in crowded restaurants. You have the right to smoke, but we've determined, a few decades ago that doing it hurts other people's health, so you should do it away from them. So this one I would encourage Minnesotans, we're going to try and get it right here. We think there's opportunities, and we kept liquor stores open. I know the camaraderie that goes with being there, but that's going to have to look a little bit different. I would encourage them not to do it. I think in talking to Governor Evers, he's trying to do the best he can in public safety. A decision was made, and this is what the courts do. It was very divided, very divisive, 4-3 decision, I believe, and it created a chaos situation that's going to be hard. And what I worry about that, if this is one of the concerns, the public health side, paramount, but I think they're going to have a hard time keeping their businesses open, and if they have to close again and they get an outrush, then you get the trust factor. So I would encourage folks not to do it. Again, I've got to trust people making the best decisions, but I would just say when you're factoring in your decision, it is about others too. You have to decide how that impacts others.
Governor, there's a group of people up the hill who are meeting, hopefully not past Sunday. Can I ask you just some questions about the things that are still hanging fire there? Seems to be 2 or 3 groupings. One is that state employee contract issue. Secondly is how you spend CARES money and whether they get a voice in how you spend CARES money, including on things like contact tracing,
Yeah.
whether you're sharing with locals. And then some of the spending issues like rental assistance, broadband, Minnesota Family Investment Program. So can you give us your views on that as we go into the last meeting?
Yeah, no, very good. And for Minnesotans out there listening, and I know that you don't sometimes get in this bubble, but there's a legislative session going on. While it's not a budget year, because we do biennium budgets every 2 years, the even-numbered years tend to be bonding bills and then some of the policy things or the cleaning up of things. I think there was a strong agreement that those policy issues that are in people's hearts and they feel very strongly about, but it's very hard to rectify, weren't going to get anything done and would have probably ate up time as we dealt with COVID-19, so they set those aside. What I can tell you is that while we're not meeting face-to-face, I was on last night with Speaker Hortman, with Minority Leader Doubt, with Senate Majority Leader Gazelka and Minority Leader Kent. And we are talking and we're working through this. In fact, right as I came in the car to here, I spoke with Senator Gazelka. We're at the point right now where I spent time last night and laid out my priorities. A bonding bill is, in my opinion, essential. I spent a lot of time before COVID-19 laying out the necessity of this. It has broad support. I guess the issue is how big it is, but we're going to need this once we come back. These water treatment plants and streets and bridges still need to be done. The interest rates are low and they also create jobs. So I think there's a pretty strong agreement around that. What gets then a little bit sideways in this, there's some other issues. And for those of you who, state contracts, these are our epidemiologists, they're Jan Malcolm, they're teachers, they're nurses, they're some of these. Those contracts were negotiated quite some time ago. They were never ratified. COVID-19 came along and there's a belief that those raises that were negotiated should come back down. The problem is that these were fairly negotiated contracts. I understand people out there listening and saying, well, why should they get a raise when I'm out of a job? It's not about trying to hurt someone else. It's trying to figure out how do we get the whole economy lifted back up and keep these people working. And we don't have the authority just to void the contract. If they do, if the legislature chooses to walk away, those folks will revert back. And we actually got a savings in healthcare that we negotiated with them for some of the raises. So it's about a wash. So we have to figure out what to do with that. We're going to have to deal with it one way or another. And then, Peter, your other question was around some of those other spending priorities like broadband. I think they're coming to some of those agreements. We've got some deficiency payments, meaning we budgeted for this, but because of COVID-19 especially, We had overtime in Department of Corrections. We had some of those. I had a very sparse, I think I told you when we did this in February, first time in Minnesota history I had a one-page supplemental budget. Now it's about 2 paragraphs, and that makes sense to us. I think there's some strong agreement on that. One of the things is around the payment of the CARES dollars. We have a system that's set up in place. I do believe the legislature, and I'm grateful for this, made a very wise decision clear back before we had a single case. We were watching the nursing home in Washington, and Minnesota was one of the first states. Remember, we were talking about whether it should be, we could maybe, this crisis could cost us up to $20 million. Remember when that was the talk, that it could cost up to $20 million. Now we know it's cost about $2.5 billion in terms of economic downturn. We've already spent about $550 million fighting this thing. They set up that fund that allowed for oversight of expenditures, and that is masks and gowns and setting up things that we could. Most of that will be reimbursed by the federal government, but it was a mechanism that allowed them to put the money in, them to have oversight, and the administration to be able to quickly move it. I'm very supportive of that. Now, the CARES Act money comes in, and that is set up under an LAC process where they have oversight on it. We wait 10 days, and then the government then the executive branch can use it for the things that we need. There is talk about who controls that. We are fully supportive of working with them on a share of this, up to 45% going to local, county, and city governments, and they're working on that. We are in agreement that we should be doing things together on small business grant programs. We're working on that, of sharing together, and contact tracing. Now, for the rest of it that's not out there yet, we think it makes sense, as it always is. Once the budget sets, once the money's there, and the way it's always been done, the administration administers that. And I think that's the proper way to go forward. But on all of these things, we're talking and making sure that they have input. One of the things I'm a little concerned with, the contact tracing issue is starting to kind of now take on a political overtone of masks, that maybe it's not necessary, maybe it's too much. I'm a little nervous about that, so I think that one may be stalling. But as far as things like broadband, broad agreement. So I have to tell you right now, I think it was Speaker Hortman said this last night, that Minnesotans have an expectation, and we proved we could do it last year, that we work together, compromise, and get something done as close to on time as possible. I'm still operating by that. I can tell you the goodwill that was expressed by Leader Gazelka on the way in here. He's fighting hard for the things he believes in. I think we can reach a compromise still.
Contact tracing, if nothing is done, you have the money and the authority to do what the department wants to do.
Yes, yes.
Did Senator Gazelka mention to you that the Mall of America has approached lawmakers, and perhaps your administration as well, asking to be able to borrow money from the tax increment financing account, because apparently only about 5% of their rent income has come in, and they're trying to find a way to weather this crisis? Your thoughts on that? This is money they would borrow and then...
Yeah, no, it's a good one. It's big, and I would argue on this as well. It's a Bloomington issue, and I'll mention that just briefly, but it's also statewide importance. And I think what's interesting on this rent piece of this is I have a lot of folks that, both numbers that we get in government, but people who own buildings, both commercial and residential, update me on their properties. These are folks that manage thousands of things across the Twin Cities and across the state. What's interesting is that in May 1st, residential rent payments were at 95%. Commercial rent payments were at 57%. And I think that's obviously because of the nature of this and cash flow issues or whatever. So I do recognize how important this is. The issue around Mall of America, I think, and apparently this is where me, and I'm going back and learning the history of this, we need to have more collaboration with the city of Bloomington, with some of the local legislators on how this is done. I think in concept, I'm certainly willing to hear them on this, and I do acknowledge the fact all our businesses we need to figure out, but when you have one that has that big of draw, both nationally and internationally, there is an impact that it has tax-wise, not just for the city of Bloomington, for the state. So we are talking about it. It is one of the issues that came up.
Are you willing to renegotiate state worker contracts? And can you talk about other efforts the state is taking to cut some staff?
Yeah. First of all, we've done hiring freezes. My staff and my commissioners all took the 10% cut immediately when that went on. I've talked about this before, that if we furloughed or let people go or whatever, at least for the first 9 months, it would cost the state money. You wouldn't save money because you'd have to pay severance, you'd have to pay sick time, you'd have to do the things that are there. And I'm also, it is not the way to do this in a pandemic. You cannot negotiate, the contracts weren't negotiated with the legislature. They were negotiated with MMB. They were decided upon and they were there. This is two parties in any negotiations. You cannot force them to take what the legislature says. I think it sets a terrible precedence on collective bargaining. I recognize the fact that everybody's saying, well, these are different times. They were negotiated pre-COVID. That doesn't change the fact that they were negotiated, they were agreed upon, and you can't leave one party out of that. And so I think leaving it at this point in time or trying to do it as an attachment, the one thing I will not do is the negotiation of a contract or something has nothing to do with a bonding bill. It has nothing to do with a tax bill. It is a separate issue. But no, I'm certainly not going to negotiate them on my own or ask the legislature to do that against them. They were agreed upon, and there's a different and an established and a legal way that those have to be handled.
Has the state initiated layoffs at this point?
We have we've asked people have taken leave. There are folks, and of course through attrition of people retiring, we are not hiring anybody back. So that is one of the biggest ways that you end up with cost savings. And those will at some point, those are negotiations and decisions we have to make. A lot of these folks, of course, though, are frontline folks. Revenue Department right now is as busy as they've ever been. DEED at the UI department's as busy as they've ever been. DNR, the same thing. So I'll make sure that we get particular numbers of where we stand today. The state workforce is smaller through attrition and a hiring freeze that has a bigger impact.
We'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
Governor, the National Governors Association continues to ask Congress for additional funds. $500 billion was one of the numbers thrown around, and I know that's now become an argument at Congress, but can you diagnose the odds of that? Do you think that could happen in some form? And I presume you'd like to have it.
Yeah, and I was on with the 7 Midwestern governors, and they were sending or trying to get a bipartisan letter together on this, and there were 2 of us who were former members of Congress, and Mike DeWine and myself. The other 5 seem much more optimistic about this than the 2 of us, having been there, and that may help you understand where it's at. Yeah, again, not being there in Congress, and how people argued, I am grateful for I think we've done so far, but I would argue that Fed Chair Powell and others are arguing we have not yet done enough. And one of the things is those who believe, and again, going back to this issue around negotiating contracts, I took some great offense with some of the floor debate in the Senate the other day where someone mentioned this is just an inconvenience for state workers, which tell that to the folks on the front lines that are out there doing this work, or tell them when their spouse has been laid off. So I think this idea about attacking this issue and about seeing what the state's capacity to be able to do this is critically important. So.
Governor, a question from one of my media colleagues. Ramsey County apparently has approached your administration about help with funding for a homeless shelter for about 200 unsheltered Ramsey County residents who are on the streets during this COVID-19 pandemic. What's the likelihood something like that will be possible given, I'm sure, the statewide demand for this type of thing?
Yeah, and I think what we should do is, I'm going to ask Teddy, maybe for our team on this, is I think we should bring in Kathy Tenbrook maybe in this issue on homelessness and homes in general, because I can tell you we spend a lot of time on this and every morning, and they're doing some amazing things of how they're leveraging both private sector dollars and what the state is doing. I think it is likely that we'll help, because this is not only an individual, this is a public health issue if we don't have people in and they're starting to run rampant. So we were very clear, and I think the executive order that I did yesterday around unsheltered and those that are most impacted by this helps to talk about how we do some of that, because in the long run I think it's a money saver if we get this right. But I think what I'd like to do on this issue is devote a little bit of time to one of these, to bring them in for the public to talk about this issue, because it's growing and you see it, and you're seeing some of these and across the country. It was ahead of time. I mean, the real shame in this is we launched the Minnesota Fund on Housing, the nonprofit, and we had the Pollard Foundation, we had the Fry Family Foundation, and we raised, if you recall, that $6 million in just a few days. We moved a significant number of people off the streets into housing, and then this thing hit. So this is an issue. It's coming up all over the state. It's of course pronounced in more of the urban areas, but it is everywhere. And I think there is what what Ramsey County, what other counties are asking for is this is a state issue. They do need some help. We're going to have to see, and that's what we're trying to still understand. Going back to Peter's point about that, Peter, to give you a clear answer on that, I'm not super hopeful. I am totally supportive. I think it'll undermine our economic recovery if we allow states. You know, I know Mitch McConnell made the comment about let the states go bankrupt. This is a real divide, and I think it's really hard when you're talking about cities and counties that are providing both education, they're providing the street plowing, they're providing all those basic services, and checks have already been sent to cruise ships. I'm not diminishing or being pejorative towards cruise ships or airlines, but the idea that there is not a value that is equal to a public sector job as a private sector job, especially now. We already have massive unemployment. Why would it help us to throw more people out into unemployment? Why would it undermine the very people who are processing and fighting COVID to have them out of jobs? That seems to be just a spiral to death. So I think we need to help them. I think we need to figure that out. And that's why I think by Monday, we need to figure out how to move at least a chunk of that money to the state and or to the counties and cities. And then for us to figure out how do we refill that fund that allows us some flexibility to put these things out. So again, I want to thank you all for being here. To incoming Supreme Court Justice Gordon Moore and his family, thank you for your service to Minnesota. Congratulations. And for all of you, we think the date that Justice Moore will go to the bench will be August 1st. And again, we hope that in that time when we have the investiture ceremony, we're further along and can maybe do this in a little more, be more the family. So thank you all.